The German commander pulled a sealed dispatch from a dead courier's coat and read it while American shells struck the road behind him. But instead of ordering a counterattack, he shoved the paper into his tunic and sent 3 officers racing toward the prisoner column. Minutes later, one of them returned with blood on his sleeve and warned him that the wrong men had already seen the message and that Berlin would kill them before the Allies ever could. Colonel Friedrich Hartmann discovered the truth on a road outside a burning railway town, where a courier motorcycle had crashed beside a ditch and scattered sealed documents across the mud. His men were preparing to pull back toward the east, but Hartmann ignored the road signs, pushed through the smoke, and took the dispatch case from the dead courier before the military police arrived to collect it. The message was not written like a surrender order, yet its meaning was worse for anyone still pretending victory was possible. It showed collapsed fuel reserves, broken railway links, missing divisions, and emergency instructions for commanders to hide the real numbers from lower units until Berlin issued a final explanation. Hartmann read it twice, then folded it fast when one of his captains stepped too close. Before he could decide what to do, American artillery landed near the road and scattered the column. Trucks rolled into ditches, prisoners shouted from the rear carts, and 2 German guards dragged wounded men away from a burning supply wagon. Hartmann saw one of the prisoners staring at the dispatch in his hand, and that single look told him the secret had already escaped the paper. The prisoner was a German signals lieutenant named Paul Brenner, captured earlier and being moved with other officers after his unit collapsed. Brenner had seen enough of the code groups to understand that Berlin was still demanding obedience while the army around them had already lost the ability to continue. Hartmann ordered him separated from the column, not to punish him, but to keep other officers from hearing what he had seen. That decision created the first conflict. Captain Adler, Hartmann's security officer, accused Brenner of spying and demanded permission to execute him as a deserter before the Americans reached the road. Hartmann refused, saying no prisoner would be shot during a retreat unless he was actively escaping. But Adler answered that men who saw forbidden reports became more dangerous than men with rifles. The American advance forced the argument into motion. Hartmann ordered the column toward an abandoned schoolhouse that had been marked as a temporary holding site, while Adler secretly sent 2 guards to take Brenner out through the orchard behind the building. Brenner fought them near the well, knocked over a crate of field maps, and shouted that the war was already finished before one guard struck him down. Hartmann reached the yard before the second blow landed. He pulled Adler away from Brenner, ordered the guards disarmed, and made every officer watch as Brenner was brought inside alive. The act did not make Hartmann look merciful to his men. It made him look dangerous, because he had protected a prisoner who knew the one fact every fanatic in the column wanted buried. By nightfall, American searchlights swept the fields around the schoolhouse, and Hartmann realized he could no longer retreat without turning the prisoners into targets. He locked the dispatch in a metal bread box, hid it beneath the classroom stove, and ordered his men to prepare white cloths at every window. Adler watched him give the order, then quietly moved toward the cellar where the most loyal guards were waiting. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. The schoolhouse surrendered at dawn, but the surrender did not end the danger inside its walls. American soldiers entered room by room, collected weapons, and moved German prisoners into the yard, while Hartmann stood at the front steps and gave his name, rank, and command. He did not mention the dispatch, the bread box, or the fact that Adler had vanished from the prisoner count during the first American search. The escalation began when a shot cracked from the cellar window and struck the wall above an American medic helping Brenner. The yard erupted with movement as MPs pulled prisoners back, and Hartmann immediately shouted that the shooter was not following his order. The American captain nearly ordered every German officer face down in the mud, but Hartmann pointed toward the cellar door and said the men inside were trying to start a massacre. Adler and 4 loyal guards had locked themselves below the schoolhouse with captured papers, 2 pistols, and 3 prisoners who had overheard Brenner's warning. They claimed the surrender was illegal because Berlin had not authorized it. From the cellar stairs, Adler shouted that Hartmann had betrayed Germany by hiding the final dispatch and protecting witnesses who would spread defeat. The American captain demanded an explanation, and Hartmann had only seconds to choose between silence and exposure. He told the Americans there was a document hidden beneath the stove, but warned them that if Adler reached it first, he would burn it and kill the men who knew its contents. The captain sent 2 MPs toward the classroom while Hartmann asked permission to speak to the cellar through the door. Adler refused to come out, but one of the prisoners inside kicked a loose brick under the threshold with a scrap of paper wrapped around it. The note said Adler planned to move the prisoners through a coal chute into the drainage ditch behind the schoolhouse before the Americans finished the search. The escalation turned from a standoff into a race, because the cellar had an exit no one outside had noticed. The MPs reached the coal chute as one guard shoved Brenner's friend through it with his hands bound. Hartmann saw the movement from the yard and ran before the American captain could stop him. He slammed into the guard at the ditch edge, knocking both men into the mud, while the prisoner crawled away toward the MPs. Adler fired once from the cellar, and the shot shattered the stone near Hartmann's shoulder. The Americans rushed the cellar from 2 sides. One squad forced the door, another blocked the ditch, and smoke grenades rolled down the steps. Adler tried to burn the captured papers in a coal bucket, but Brenner, still weak from the beating, dragged himself across the classroom floor and pointed to the stove before the flames reached the hidden bread box. An MP pulled it free with a shovel. When the dispatch was opened in the yard, the American captain understood why the prisoners had nearly been killed. The paper proved that Hartmann had known the strategic collapse before many commanders were willing to admit it, and that Adler's men had been ready to murder witnesses to preserve Berlin's illusion. Hartmann was taken into custody, but not with the other officers. He was placed under separate guard because his knowledge had become a battlefield of its own. The major consequence arrived when the Americans transferred Hartmann, Brenner, and the captured dispatch to a larger POW camp behind the lines. The convoy had barely entered the camp gate when a German prisoner in the intake yard recognized Adler's name and shouted a warning to several officers near the barracks. Within minutes, rumors spread that Hartmann had carried proof of defeat and had surrendered men before Berlin allowed it. The camp commander ordered Hartmann placed in an isolation room for his own safety, but the decision exposed a new problem. Several German prisoners already controlled the internal Barak hierarchy, and they treated any officer linked to surrender or defeat as a threat. Hartmann had escaped Adler's cellar only to enter a camp where hundreds of prisoners might decide that his knowledge made him unforgivable. Brenner was taken to the infirmary, but he was not safe there either. A prisoner orderly tried to switch his medical tag with another patient's tag, which would have moved him to a crowded Barak before he could give a statement. An American nurse noticed the ink was still wet and called the MPs. Under the mattress, they found a folded note ordering Brenner to be placed where discipline could reach him. The consequence widened as American interrogators questioned Hartmann about the dispatch. He confirmed that the document was real, but he refused to name every officer who had seen related reports unless Brenner and the other witnesses were protected first. The interrogator threatened to treat him as obstructive, yet Hartmann answered that a dead witness would make the entire report worthless. That same afternoon, a fight broke out in Barak 4 after a prisoner officer accused Hartmann of spreading enemy propaganda. The Americans broke it up quickly, but one wounded prisoner admitted that Adler's loyal men had sent messages ahead before the transfer. Hartmann realized that the attempt to bury the truth had not ended with the cellar. It had followed him into captivity. The camp commandant ordered a full search of German prisoner offices, and the search uncovered a hidden roster marked with red circles beside the names of Brenner, 2 schoolhouse prisoners, and Hartmann himself. The list was not official American paperwork. It had been made inside the camp by prisoners who wanted to punish anyone connected to the dispatch before Allied investigators could use their testimony. Hartmann asked to be moved into the same protected section as Brenner, not for comfort, but because the witnesses needed to compare what each had seen before the story was broken apart. The request angered the German prisoner leaders, who claimed he was hiding behind Americans after betraying his uniform. Hartmann answered nothing, but he placed his statement on the table and signed it while they watched through the wire. By evening, the consequence became impossible to contain. The dispatch was copied, Brenner's testimony was recorded, and the red circle roster was pinned beside the evidence board in the American office. Hartmann had not merely known the war was lost before Berlin admitted it. He had triggered a chain of violence from men who needed that truth buried, and every new attack proved the document mattered more than any single prisoner. The major reversal came the next morning when Adler was brought into the same POW camp under heavy guard, wounded, furious, and still claiming that Hartmann had invented the dispatch to save himself. The Americans expected Adler to deny everything, but he did something more dangerous. He produced a second document from his boot lining and claimed it proved Hartmann had altered the original message before surrender. The accusation shocked the camp staff because the second paper looked official. It carried matching codes, familiar stamps, and a short paragraph stating that continued resistance remained possible if commanders preserved morale. German prisoner leaders seized on it immediately, shouting that Hartmann had hidden the real order and helped the Americans break German discipline. Hartmann asked to inspect the second paper under a lamp. He did not argue about the wording. He pointed instead to the routing marks, then to the ink used on the final paragraph. The first half had been typed at a frontline station, but the last lines had been added later on a different machine. Adler had not found a correction. He had forged hope onto a dead report. The reversal shifted again when Brenner identified the typewriter marks. The added lines matched the machine from the schoolhouse cellar, the same room where Adler had tried to burn the evidence. American MPs searched Adler's captured field bag and found the missing ribbon wrapped in cloth. When the ribbon was rolled across paper, the false paragraph appeared in fragments, proving the forged order had been created after Hartmann's surrender decision. Adler tried to turn the prisoners against Brenner by calling him a cowardly signals clerk, but the old schoolhouse prisoner who had escaped through the coal chute stepped forward and identified Adler as the man who had ordered witnesses killed. The camp yard changed in a single movement. Men who had shouted against Hartmann now looked toward Adler, because the defender of Berlin's honor had been caught manufacturing Berlin's words. The American commandant ordered a public evidence hearing inside the camp yard to prevent another round of rumors. The original dispatch, the forged edition, the typewriter ribbon, the red circle roster, and the cellar witness statements were placed on one table. Hartmann was brought out under guard, not as an honored man, but as the first witness who had refused to let the document die. The reversal became complete when one of Adler's former guards broke down and admitted that Adler had ordered the executions before the Americans entered the schoolhouse. He said Adler believed the war could survive only if men feared the truth more than defeat. Hartmann listened without moving, but Brenner lowered his head because the admission confirmed how close the witnesses had come to disappearing. By sunset, the camp no longer argued about whether Hartmann had altered the message. The evidence showed Adler had tried to alter reality after reality had already collapsed. The man who accused Hartmann of betrayal had forged orders, threatened witnesses, and carried a false paragraph into captivity. The truth Hartmann protected was no longer hidden in a bread box. It stood on a table where every side could see it. The final irreversible event began when American officers ordered every prisoner leader, witness, and accused man assembled in the main yard for a formal record. Hartmann stood beside the evidence table with Brenner and the schoolhouse witnesses behind him, while Adler stood across from them with two MPs on either side. The entire camp watched because every rumor, threat, and forged order had led to that single line of men. The commandant ordered the original dispatch read aloud in German and English. The words did not announce surrender. Yet the numbers described a country fighting beyond its means, sending orders that reality could no longer support. As each section was read, American clerks marked it against depot records, rail reports, and captured logistics files. The document survived every comparison. Then the forged paragraph was read. Brenner demonstrated the different typewriter marks. The ribbon fragments were shown, and the former guard repeated Adler's order to silence witnesses. The final event was not a trial in the full legal sense, but it made the truth operational. From that moment, no officer in the camp could claim the document was enemy invention without contradicting physical proof. Adler made one last attempt to break the record. He lunged toward the evidence table and knocked over the ink bottle, trying to stain the original dispatch before the MPs caught him. Hartmann moved faster than anyone expected, grabbing the dispatch case and lifting it out of the spill. The ink spread across the table, covering the forged paper instead, while the original remained dry in Hartmann's hands. The yard erupted, but the Americans restored order before violence could swallow the moment. The commandant ordered Adler removed from the camp hierarchy permanently and placed under separate confinement, pending investigation for witness intimidation and attempted destruction of evidence. His loyal network was broken apart that same hour, with every red circle name moved to protected quarters. Hartmann then did something no one expected. He handed the original dispatch to Brenner, not to the American commandant, and told him through the interpreter to carry it to the clerk because he had been the first prisoner brave enough to say aloud what the paper meant. Brenner walked across the yard with the dispatch case, while German prisoners watched a signals clerk become the keeper of the truth their officers had tried to bury. The final record was sealed before dusk. Hartmann's statement, Brenner's testimony, the cellar witness report, the ribbon proof, and the logistics comparisons were placed together in one packet. The commandant signed it, the interpreter signed it, and even the old schoolhouse prisoner marked the paper with a shaky hand. The truth no longer depended on Hartmann's memory or Brenner's courage alone. As Adler was marched away, Hartmann remained in the yard under guard, still an enemy prisoner and still responsible for his command, but no longer silent. He had known the war was over before Berlin admitted it, and the irreversible event was that the knowledge had survived every attempt to kill, forge, burn, or bury it. Once the packet left the camp under armed escort, no order from Berlin could make the numbers disappear. That evening, Brenner carried the sealed packet to the American records truck while Hartmann watched from behind the wire. The dispatch case was dented, the forged paper was stained, and the original message was finally protected under witness signatures. Adler had tried to turn truth into treason, but the camp had seen the difference in daylight. Hartmann did not leave as a hero, and no one saluted him. Yet the men marked for silence were alive, and the document he had hidden under a stove was now beyond anyone's reach. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WW2 stories.